All right, thank you everyone. Thanks for coming out. Thanks a lot to Pavel and setting this up. Big thanks to OWASP for actually sponsoring me and getting me out here. That's awesome. And it's awesome to be in Bratislava. It's actually been one of the best trips out in Europe. So, absolute truth. So, what I'll be talking about today is I'll be doing my DEF CON and Black Hat talk from this year, How I Met Your Girlfriend. And I'll be talking about some really cool attacks in the web and basically some things that people haven't really thought about in the web that's existed before. So thanks for having me. So just a little bit about me. I'm a security researcher for fun. I don't do this professionally, but security is awesome. I think a lot of us enjoy security or just getting around things, and so I love doing it. Do it all the time, just again for fun. You may know me as the creator of the MySpace worm from a few years back, the first XSS worm. Recently, I created something called the Ever Cookie, which I found is on the front page of the New York Times today, which is pretty cool. I got a lot of hate mail. That's okay. And if you're familiar with Finality, I co-founded a company called Finality. We created Trixbox and some other voice over IP to small business voice over IP phone systems. So that's pretty cool that I have back in Los Angeles. I am American, as you can tell. I'm sorry I can't be speaking to you in Slavic, so I appreciate you working with me here. And of course I love Lady Gaga, all right? So you guys are probably wondering, yeah, maybe I heard about you a couple years ago, maybe I haven't heard about you at all, but, yeah, you did something maybe a few years ago, and I haven't really heard of you since then. So, what happened? Well, the government didn't let me touch computers. The American government. They basically came to my house after the MySpace worm, they broke in, they raided me, basically hacker-style, total hacker-style, swordfish-style raid. I mean, it's the one thing America is accurate in when it comes to movies, raiding hackers. They just came in, 15 guys with guns, went into my room, went into my roommate's room, pulled my girlfriend out at the time. She was naked under the sheets, pulled my roommate out of the shower, just grabbed him by his hair. It was great. So after that, they took all my stuff. They took my cell phone, they took my laptop, anything with data on it, CDs, DVDs, any sort of media. Worst of all, they took my iPod. I mean, that was really bad. After that, I lost computer use. Lost computer use forever, literally. I went into a case for months and months and fought with the government, the U.S. government. And what's interesting is it was never MySpace that came after me. It was actually the U.S. government, which is pretty interesting. You probably hear a lot about U.S. law and strange lawsuits and everything. But yeah, with that, it was actually the government that came after me. After that, I had a lot of community service, which is great. I'm so glad to give back. Picking up trash on the side of the road. They couldn't actually put me to better use, but I paid some restitution and I went to probation for a couple of years, which is like AOL in real life. It's crazy. So, fortunately, a few years later, I went back to court and I was able to persuade them and get everything reduced, literally everything. So, I'm back on computers, no more probation, paid off the restitution, did my community service, really helped Los Angeles out, and I'm back. So, I'm glad to be here with you guys today. So, why the web? Why are we talking about the web? Well, I think the web's really cool because there's a lot you can do with it. I think the coolest thing about the web, and we don't really think of it like this, is that it's essentially a code distribution channel. So what do I mean by that, code distribution channel? Well, basically it's a way that I can create code and get it to you, and you can execute it on your computer. You're executing actual code on your computer. And we normally don't think of it like that, right? We think, oh, it's just a web page, right? It's some HTML that's getting rendered in a browser. But no, you're actually executing code. And we've seen over and over again there are ways to execute even lower level code and get access that you normally wouldn't be privileged to get from a web browser. So I think that's one of the really cool thing. Where a couple of years ago, if you wanted to distribute code, you might put it online, but not everyone had a browser, not everyone had internet. Today, virtually every device out there has a browser. Virtually every device out there has internet. I mean, our phones have full-fledged HTML5, browsers. Some even support Flash, except Apple, because they hate Flash. So I think that's really cool. Again, a couple years ago, you'd have to mail CDs to people to try to get them that code and try to get them to actually execute it. So that's why I really like the web. Another thing is the browsers are pretty powerful. You can do a lot with browsers. Sure, they just speak HTTP, but they speak some other protocols as well, right? They speak HTTPS, they communicate in FTP, and they can communicate in ways they don't even understand. So we'll get into that. So typically, before I find myself getting in trouble, I'm often browsing around a social network. And I come across this profile of Anna Faris. She's an extremely talented American actress. She's been in very famous movies, such as Scary Movie, if you've seen that. Really well received. And I'm looking at her profile and I'm saying, wow, she seems to be some sort of fruit model in this picture. But she loves application security, awesome, and she loves nerds, great. So I should send her a message, right? Facebook is awesome because you see someone, you want to communicate with them, you hit send message. So I'm about to do that, but it'd be respectful of me to check her relationship status. So I do that and I see relationship. She's not single, it's not complicated. She's in a relationship. I'm like, damn, so, all right, well, who is this guy anyway? So let's look him up. So I go and I do a little research and I find, all right, so he's a CISSP, right? He knows some security. He's certified there. CEO of a security company, wrote some books about security, co-developed clickjacking, if you've seen that, really cool technology. Certified application security specialist, we won't go into that. So who is this guy? This guy is Robert R. Snake Hansen. He's a well-known security expert in the field. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, I really want to get with Anna, and the problem is she's in a relationship with this guy, R. Snake. How do I systematically destroy their relationship? Right? Because that's what we're all thinking, right? Okay, the problem, now normally what I would do is I do some sort of normal attack, let's say an XSS attack to steal his cookies and then log in as him and then, write terrible things on Anna's wall. However, I'm dealing with Robert Hansen, right? He's a security expert. He's probably not going to fall for that stuff. He's probably not going to hit malicious links. If he does, let's say he gets to a malicious website, he's probably not going to execute any issues like XSS or CSRF. Those probably won't affect him. He's probably running something like Firefox with no script that would prevent him from being attacked from these type of attacks. All right, so if I can't attack this guy because he's so secure, what do? Well, instead, I won't attack him, but I'll attack the services around him, because that will actually probably be easier to attack. So what are some of the services that Robert would use? Well, we already know one of them, Facebook. He's on Facebook. And what I'd love to do is get into his account. And from there I can do a lot more. And again, XSS to maybe steal his cookies and log in as him will not work. So we're going to have to look deeper and see what else we can do. So let's learn a little bit about Facebook. So if we browse to facebook.com, what we see is we get redirected to index.php. All right, so what's that tell us? Well, it tells us that Facebook is written in PHP. Awesome. I know what you're thinking. It's pronounced FUP. It's not. It's not. I looked it up. It's PHP. Now, the great thing about PHP is, as a lot of you probably know, it's an extremely common web scripting language used on the back end. So a lot of servers have it. A lot of people program it. It's continuing to be developed. So that's pretty good, right? A lot of people use it, a lot of people understand it. Another thing is sessions, which we're assuming that's what we're trying to attack, are basically only in one place. There's basically one function for sessions. And with that function, that's used by everything. So if you're going to create a session in PHP, you're going to use that same function to create that session every single time. If you're using a framework on top of PHP, like CakePHP, Kohana, CodeIgniter, any of those are going to use the same exact mechanism to create the session. All right, so what is a session? Essentially, it's a random identifier. It's a random identifier that's stored in a cookie to signify, oh, this is you. So let's say when Robert logs into Facebook, he types in his username and his password, which is probably change me, and he gets a cookie. And that cookie contains just some long random string. Now that random string, when he sends it back, obviously that will tell Facebook in the future, oh, you don't have to log me in, I'm already logged in, you know who I am, you know what permissions I have, what pictures to show me. So let's understand these sessions a little bit further. How can we do that? Well, PHP is open source, so we can look at PHP's source and just understand how does this session work. So let's load it up. If we take a look at the session start function, which is PHP's function for creating sessions, and we open it up and look at the C code, we can see something, we can see exactly how it builds the unique identifier. So what it does here is it does a couple of things. When Robert connects and he logs in and he acquires that cookie, the cookie is being produced from a couple of different pieces of information that end up producing a unique or random identifier. IP address, so the IP address of Robert, the epoch, basically the time of day, or the time that the cookie was acquired, the microseconds, basically the exact microsecond the cookie was acquired, as well as a random value. They're all packed together into one string and then hashed, basically with a one-way hash like SHA-1 or MD5. Now, at this point, we need to understand how big is that. So IP address, the way they're using it is they're saying IP address 32 bits, epoch 32 bits, microseconds 32 bits, and a random value 64 bits. Now you add them all up, that's 160 bits, and if you hash it with SHA-1, you end up also with 160 bits because SHA-1 produces 160-bit hashes. So really quickly, how big is a bit anyway? Bits can be a little confusing, especially if you're dealing with web where you don't have to deal with bits. All you have to deal with are typically strings. So a really cool thing that you can just remember if you want to know how to convert how many values are in X number of bits, what you do is you just remember the first 10. So 0 through 9 bits. 0 bits is basically one value. It's always 0. 1 bit is 2 values. You have 0 and 1. So if you can remember 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 5, 12 as 0 through 9 bits. And you can also remember that for every 10 bits, you add 3 zeros, then what you can do is you can quickly realize things like this. So let's say someone says 20 bits, you can say, oh, well, I know 0 means 1, so we'll start with a 1, and 20, which is 10 and 10, are 6 zeros. So you know it's approximately 1,000,000 possible values. 25, we say 5 is 32, and then 20 again, so another 6 zeros, approximately 32 million. So easy way to understand bits. So what if I wanted to brute force this? I mean, 160 bits is really only 20 characters. That's not very much. Now, if I did want to brute force it, I calculated it out, and assuming I had access to an extremely powerful supercomputer, like my MacBook Pro, then, and assuming I could calculate approximately 100 trillion values per second, it would take over 900 quadrillion eons to brute force the 160 bits. I don't even know how long an eon is. I had to look that up. So again, I don't think I'm going to be able to brute force this. 160 bits. It's a lot of data, a lot of possible values that Robert would have as his session identifier. Well, wait a second. Microseconds. How many microseconds are in a second? Aren't there only 1,000,000 microseconds in a second? And we just learned that 1,000,000 values is approximately 20 bits. So really, that's not 32 bits, that's actually 20 bits for the microseconds. We can reduce 12. We know it's always going to be a value between 0 and 999,999. All right, interesting. So we just reduced our total string size for that unique identifier from 160 bits to 148 bits. All right, that's neat, but we're probably not going to brute force it at 148 bits. So let's take a look at what else we can do. Well, Facebook has this awesome feature called chat, and I love chatting with people. It's great. So on chat, if you've seen it before, it uses a really cool technology called Ajax that I learned about a few years ago. Now, what's happening is your browser is basically connecting to Facebook every few seconds and saying, hey, is anyone new online? Is anyone new offline, away, anything like that? And Facebook will respond and say, well, here's who's online, here's who's offline, and it'll show you if something changed, basically status of someone changed. Now, this is interesting because when you log into Facebook, the first thing that happens is you're logged into chat. So if Robert goes to facebook.com, puts in his authentication information in, and I see that he has just come onto chat, I know that's the moment that he logged in. The problem is, it happens, Facebook only tells me every few seconds. So if I reproduce those requests myself, and I just write a program to just hit it every single second, then I'll know the exact second that he logged in. And I'll know the epoch, basically the time of day that he had logged in, which was 32 bits of the cookie. Now, you're thinking, all right, Sammy, but although you're using an Apple, so obviously your time is probably extremely accurate, what if Facebook servers and their time are basically drifted from your time? Well, it doesn't matter because most web servers will provide the actual timestamp right in there, right in the HTTP response. So every second, if you're sending these requests, you will get the exact time in the response according to Facebook's server of when that person logged in. And now, you've just reduced another 32 bits of this value. So we're now down to 116 bits from 160, which is pretty cool. But it's still a lot. 116 is a lot. So what else can we do? Well, I just love chatting. I can't stop chatting. So I'm going to chat Robert, and I'm going to say, hey, visit this link. All right, now Robert's not going to click any malicious link, right? He's a smart guy, but I'll give him something that's not very malicious. Maybe I'll give him my blog, and he'll go there. And there won't be any XSS, there won't be any sort of attacks on there, no exploits or anything like that. And when he goes there, all I'm going to do is acquire his IP address. If we recall, his IP address is another 32 bits of that cookie. Now, your cookie, I mean, that session identifier, that's the thing that says, I am this person and I am no one else. When you log into your bank, you're getting a cookie and you're getting a session identifier. And if you're using PHP, it's the same exact session identifier that's happening here. The same exact code that's getting executed on your bank account. So, now you're thinking, all right, well, Robert's really secure. He's really smart. He's probably going to hide himself. Maybe he'll hide behind a proxy or he'll use Tor. Well, that's fine. Because if he's that secure, he's going to be using the proxy and Tor on Facebook as well. So Facebook will acquire the same exact IP address that I'm going to acquire. And that's how we get his IP address to reduce another 32 bits. Awesome. So we've just taken the 160 bits and brought it down to 84 bits. Cool, still a lot. Now, the only thing left here is this random LCG value, this PRNG. So what is that? Well, an LCG, it's a type of random number generator. It just produces random numbers. An LCG is a linear congruential generator. It's a really well understood type of pseudo-random number generator, or PRNG. Now, it's really well studied. It's been around longer than I've been alive. I think it's now 25 years or so that it's been around. So people have understood how to even reverse it if you can acquire enough data from a PRNG. The problem is PHP uses something called a combined LCG. Basically, they have two random number generators. And whenever you access a random number, it pulls one from here, and then XORs them. So you get some totally random number, or more pseudo-random. So I'm probably not going to be able to reverse that. So let's still understand how this works. Whenever you have a PRNG, you have to seed it. Basically, your seed is the one piece of actual pseudo-random or random data that produces all the random values from then on. If you ever can acquire a seed from a random number generator, you then know for 100% of the time what every single random number will come out. Every single one. It's not random, right? It's all based off that one number, and then it's just an algorithm. So let's take a look at what the LCG does. Again, PHP is open source, so we can take a look at the code right there. If we look at it, when you access this LCG, the first thing it does is check if it's been seeded. It will never reseed it. It only seeds it once. Now, if it hasn't been seeded, it goes to a seed function called LCG seed. And what's that do? Well, it does two things. It creates a 64-bit seed split into two. So two 32-bit values, seed 1 and seed 2. Now, how do those work? We'll get into a little bit of math. It's not too important that we explain it. If you guys are interested, there's code. I've released code online that details this very well, and also has code that will basically produce this information for you. So, S1 or seed 1, what it does is it takes the current time, the time that the process was seeded, typically when PHP or Apache or web server was started, and it takes that time in seconds, and then it XORs it with the ones complement of the microseconds. What? I don't know what that means. Okay, don't worry about that. So ignore the ones complement. Just realize that it's taking a value, basically the second that it started, that PHP started up, and it's mixing it with the microseconds. Now, the second that it started up is a 32-bit value. But if we recall, microseconds is only 20 bits. So really what's happening, it's only 20 bits that's getting mixed. And what's interesting is it's the 20 bits that are much harder for me to guess. So let's say Facebook, you want to estimate when their web server started, right? When this was seeded. I could probably estimate that the server that I'm using was started this year. Like I can just, it's probably reasonable. They probably restart servers all the time, and processes are constantly respawning. So I can say, yeah, 2010, the server started. I can probably guess within a month time as well. I can probably say, yeah, it probably started this month. I probably won't be able to guess, the day, the hours, the minutes, the seconds, which is interesting. I'm definitely not going to be able to guess the microseconds that it started. But the great thing is they leave the year and month and even the week intact, and they just overwrite the seconds and the minutes and the hours, the data I can't guess anyway. So they mix that with other variable data that I'm not going to guess, and the 12 bits that I can guess remain static, and I can guess those from now. And you're thinking, all right, Sammy, what if you can't guess those? Well, most web servers are pretty great. They allow you to if you make a certain number of connections, they'll typically respawn. And what happens when you respawn? You're rerunning the PHP application, and now you reseed, and you get a brand new seed. So if I just sent 20,000 requests for some very simple URL, what will happen is that server will respawn, create a new seed, and now I know for a fact at least what day that process started. I may not know the second or the minute because it won't tell me, but I know enough information that I can guess the day. And all I need is a 12-day window to estimate those other 12 bits that never get modified. All right, so that's 12 bits down from the total of the 64-bit seed. Now, the other half, the other 32 bits, what is that? Well, they use this really advanced formula called the process ID. But wait a second. Process IDs aren't even 32 bits. They're 15 bits on Linux by default. So without doing any work, because we're really lazy, we can reduce 17 bits. We don't have to do anything. And automatically 17 bits go away, and all we have is a 15-bit part of seed 2, not 32. Now here's the great thing. Process IDs are extremely easy to get. Here's some of the more complex ways. We could, if we hacked the server somehow and could execute PHP, we could run the function getMyPID. If we hacked it another way, or we had a shell of any type of user, we could run PS and acquire the process ID that way. Those are unreasonable ways. Let's say they're running Apache and they have a server info page, which is very, very common on a lot of servers. You could run that. You could go to the server info page and acquire the PID. Or, since they're running PHP, you could probably go to the PHP info page, which is also very common on a lot of PHP servers, and acquire the process ID. And that's how you reduce 32 bits from the second seed entirely. So this is absolutely crazy. This is the data that's protecting your information. No matter what website you go to, assuming they're using PHP, it's this cookie, right? This random identifier that we came from 160 bits down to 40 bits. I can now brute force this. Awesome. But wait, there's more. Those 40 bits are separated in two spaces, right? We have your cookie, which we're trying to brute force the microseconds of when that person acquired the cookie, and we're also trying to brute force the microseconds of when the PRNG started, or when the seed was acquired. Well, what if we take that seed and we just break the PRNG or brute force the PRNG independently? Well, with every bit, you're just doubling the number of values. So if we calculate those 20 bits independently and just say, all right, well, these are the 20 bits for the PRNG, and then we later on calculate the 20 bits for the cookie, that's actually only 21 bits, not 40. Because we're really just guessing this half, and then we're guessing this half. And total, it's 21 bits. So, because the PRNG is totally separate from a cookie, we can brute force that, and within seconds, with code I've released, you can figure out the original seed, and then you know every possible random number that will ever come out of there. Every single one. Now let's think, where else is randomness used? Used in CAPTCHAs? Have you ever been to a website and you forgot your password? And you go and you say, all right, you put in your username. Let's say you mistyped your username and accidentally typed in administrator. And what it does is it emails the administrator, which is not you, a URL to a location where they can reset their password. Well, what's that URL? Pretty sure it's a random URL, right? It's just a URL with some random text at the end, so no one can guess it. But you can, because you know the PRNG, you know the seed, and you know every single random number that will come out. So you can guess that exactly, reset the administrator's password, then change their email address so they can't even go back in and reset their own password. Then it'll just email you. So just knowing the PRNG by itself is a pretty crazy attack. We take it one step further, and because we've already reduced the cookie so much, all we have to guess is now 20 bits of the cookie. If you recall, 20 bits, 0, 10, and 10, which is approximately 1 million. On average, that's 500,000 cookies. So with brute forcing, on average, within 500,000 requests, I become Robert. And I've logged in as him. Awesome. You can do that within hours. So this is absolutely crazy. It's just crazy that this attack can be done, and it can be done, you know, on many sites. It is a difficult attack to execute. So how do we fix it, right? I'm freaking out. I don't want people to hack my forum about what Apple. I love Apple. So what do? Well, use a new version of PHP. You know, I've released this to the PHP guys. They've updated their seed. It's harder to break now. So make sure you're using new versions of software. If you want, create your own session values. Use something like dev urandom on Linux and access that random data. It's much better. I used Facebook as an example because they're actually not vulnerable. Why? I thought they were running PHP. Well, they're actually running hip-hop, which is a modification of PHP that they've created. Because they get so much traffic, they've created this version where basically it takes the PHP, converts it into C++, compiles it, and you're essentially running machine code at that point. And they've done some other modifications which make this attack not work. I used Facebook and not many of the other places that are vulnerable as an example because I don't want to go to jail again. So, at this point, I've broken into Robert's account. I can do whatever I want now. So what am I going to do? Well, this time, I might as well email Anna as Robert. Now I can get her to visit a malicious link because she's going to trust Robert. So I go ahead, I log in as Robert now that I've brute forced this cookie. Only took a couple hours. I then send her a message and I get her to visit a malicious link. And that malicious link, what I'm going to be doing is attacking her network via the web. All right. So let's see. Let's learn a little bit about networks. Right. This is your network. This is your network on drugs. This is actually probably a lot of your networks. So we're going to talk a little bit about NATs. All right. What is a NAT? Well, basically, I don't know if you've heard, but we're running out of IP addresses. Her rumor going around. And NATs, basically what they do is they take a public IP address and they allow you to have multiple systems or multiple network devices behind that single public IP address. Before NATs, every network device had to have its own IP address. So what would happen is, let's say you have PC2 there, and it would have public IP address. Anyone could connect to it. Anyone could try attacking any services it was running. If it were running SSH, you could try brute forcing username and password on there. If it had a web server, you could connect to it and try attacking anything on there. The NAT now allows that sharing of the single public IP address among multiple devices, and it also protects those systems. Right now it says, oh, well, these systems are, let's say you try, an outside attacker tries to connect on port 80. What will happen is the NAT says, I'm not letting that through. I don't have port forwarding enabled, I don't have DMZ enabled, and I don't want some remote person to just connect in unless my internal people, whom I trust, said so. So the NAT kind of serves as an internet condom. It basically protects you from just outside things that you wouldn't want coming in. So we're going to take a quick detour, and we're going to talk about cross-protocol scripting. So what's cross-protocol scripting? Well, the interesting thing about HTTP is that an HTTP server can run on any port, just like any service. And a web browser will connect to that HTTP server on any port. But what's really interesting is HTTP is a new line-based protocol. What I mean by that is whenever you send data, you always end it with a new line to say, all right, now I'm going to, that's the end of that piece of data. Where a fixed byte protocol like TCP, you just say these 4 bytes are this and these 4 bits are this. With new line protocols, what's cool is that HTTP isn't the only new line based protocol out there. So there are other new line based protocols. There are other protocols where you say, here's a bunch of data, and here's a new line, so that's the end of that data. I'm going to send you some more data. Now, with HTTP, let's say SMTP, for example, or IRC. IRC is Internet Relay Chat. I love chat. So if you connect to one of those servers, those, again, are new line-based protocols. With IRC, you connect to a server and you say, hey, this is my username, new line. This is my nickname, new line. I want to join this channel, new line, and I want to chat. I want to send a message. How can we do that with HTTP? Well, again, HTTP is a new line-based protocol. So what if we control the browser and control the communication of that browser and make them communicate with that IRC server and send that data we want? Well, Sammy, the browser actually doesn't send just any data you want. It sends, let's say, your GET request, which says GET and then the data you sent. But as soon as that server sees get, it'll be like, I don't know what that is. Has anyone used IRC here? A couple people? Are you too embarrassed to say it? It's okay. All right, have you ever sent an invalid command to IRC? What happened? Anything? No? It said invalid command, right? All right, that's it. It just says invalid command, and then it moves on. And then you can continue chatting in, pound teen chat. That's cool. So now with HTTP, there are basically two pieces of data, a couple more, but two real big pieces of data we can control. We can control the get request, so get/whatever. We can change that. And there's another piece of data called basically the post data if we're doing an HTTP post. Well, the post data lies at the end of the HTTP response, or the HTTP request, I'm sorry. So you'll send all this HTTP request data, like post, then you'll send user agent, you'll send cookies, and then you get to the data that the browser is sending and is entirely configurable, which is your post data. Well, what if I sent the IRC commands in that post data? So I send username this, nickname that, join this channel, and send a message. Well, how does IRC look in the first place? So what we have is, again, you connect, the server will send some data, we'll send our username, nickname, join the channel, and send a message. But again, what if we created a form? What if we created a form on a malicious server? So we have our malicious server. That's supposed to say HP. I don't know what happened there. So we have our malicious server, and let's say we create a form, and on there, instead we have, that form connects to an IRC server. So instead of connecting to an actual web server, it connects to an IRC server, and there's post data at the end that says, all right, send this data, I want you to join this channel and send this message. Well, your browser will execute that form. Now this is Anna's browser. She's visiting my malicious page through her NAT, and she executes that. So she connects to an IRC server, she says get, or she says post. The IRC server says, I have no idea what you're talking about. It ignores it. Then it goes to the next line, user agent, says, don't know what you're talking about, ignoring it, until it gets to the post data, at which point it totally knows what it's talking about. It says, oh, I understand this command, I'm going to execute that command. Oh, I understand this next command, I'm going to execute that too. And at that point, it executes all of those IRC commands as her IP address, without any authentication or verification or confirmation by her. Here's the code, it's very simple. You create a form, you can hide it, connect to an IRC server on port 667 that we're saying is HTTP, even though it's not, and then send the post data. You submit it. You can actually do this all with HTML and no JavaScript at all. It's pretty cool. So it ends up looking like this. Basically, you send all your post data, your HTTP headers, and then you send the data in red that gets executed by the IRC server because it finally says, oh, I understand these messages. So that's cool. Now, you can even do other attacks. For example, what if you connected to an SMTP server, a mail server? Mail servers are also new line based. So let's say you have a website that gets, say, 1,000 hits a day. You can then send 1,000 Viagra spam a day from random IP addresses. Right? It'll be very hard to track to you because it's just totally random people. So it's pretty crazy. But that's not the point. We're going to talk about something a little more interesting. We're going to talk about NAT pinning, which is like XPS times over 9,000. All right, so what is NAT pinning? Well, with cross-protocol scripting, we're confusing the browser, right? It thinks it's communicating with the HTTP server, but we're really communicating with an IRC server. NAT pinning is something that we're going to use to actually confuse the router and not only the browser. So in this scenario, we'll continue to communicate with, say, an IRC server. The browser will connect to my website, download that HTML, and then go to this server, connect to port 667, the IRC port, and then send some data. But I don't care what the browser thinks it's doing. What I really care is what the router thinks it's doing. So, do you guys remember back in the day when you tried to FTP some files and it wouldn't work? You just tried to do like you connect to an FTP server, and as soon as you tried to download a file or send a file, it just wouldn't work. Well, that's because FTP uses multiple ports. You connect on port 21, which your router will allow, and then you say, I want to download this file. And you say, to download that file, send it back to me on this port. So you open a port on your computer, but your NAT will never let that back in because the NAT just sees the FTP server coming back, connecting it to this random port, whether it be 20 or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and your NAT says, sorry, I don't allow unknown inbound connections. So the router vendors got smart and they said, you know what, we want good user experience for our users, so we're going to actually monitor those connections. When we see an FTP connection go out, we're going to monitor that, and whenever we see the internal person that we trust, Anna, connect out and say, hey, I want this file on this port, we'll port forward that and we'll send that file back to her. Now, IRC has the same thing. It's called DCC. So you can say a DCC file send, and you use this to send really awesome pictures over IRC directly to a person. So the way DCC would work is you send a message on the server to the person you're trying to communicate with, and you say, hey, I want you to connect back to me on this port, and then we'll just talk directly. And that person can either accept or decline that. If they accept, they connect back to you, and they connect to that port. Now again, the routers had the same issue where the DCC chats or DCC file sends would not work, and they got smart and they said, all right, we're going to monitor connections to port 667. And if we see a DCC chat or a DCC file send, then we'll port forward that port back to the internal user who requested it. But wait a second. I can get Anna to create this IRC connection that's really just the web browser submitting this data. If I can get her to connect to an IRC server out there and send the DCC request, can't I get that router to then port forward whatever port number I put in there back to her? So I create a browser, or basically a form that says connect to this IRC server, and you're not going to join a channel. You're not going to send dirty messages to any chat rooms. Instead, you're just going to send this private message, DCC chat, and you're saying, I want you to connect back to me on port 22. And what's the router do? It says, oh, I see my internal user, whom I trust, trying to get an inbound connection on port 22 SSH. I better allow that through. Oh, that's funny. That post message had some other DCCs in there as well. It also had, 21, 23, 25, 43, 443, 80, 1028, and about 65,530 other ports. Every single port. You can put it all in this post, and the router will just read line by line. Oh, port 1, port 2, port 3, and it starts port forwarding everything to your internal system. Now, any public attacker can go and attack anything, any port on your system that you thought was safe behind your LAN. It's simple. Here's the code, right? That's all. And the cool thing is you don't even need an IRC server. You could actually just set up a service that listens on port 667 and does nothing. It just listens. Which a lot of girls told me that they wish I would do more. But so as long as the service just listens, the router doesn't care. The router just sees those private messages going out and starts sending this in, starts port forwarding those ports back, and now you can attack any service. So, don't run Sentinel from 1984 because it's just because you think you're safe from your NAT. You're not. So, once the browser started hearing about cross-protocol scripting, not NAT pinning, which I demonstrated here, but just the cross-protocol scripting, the attacking IRC channels, they said, you know what? We want to stop that. These poor IRC users, the abuse they go through. What we'll do is we'll block any connections to port 6667, the IRC port. Well, that's interesting. So let's talk about fixed byte protocols again, right? TCP, let's say UDP, TCP and UDP both have ports, source port and destination port. Well, those are fixed byte protocols. The port will always be 16 bits. You can't expand it, you can't reduce it. So what if we connected to a port that was larger than 16 bits? What would happen? Well, let's say we take 6667 and we add 1 bit to it. So we add 65,536. What we end up with is a value of 72,203, not 6667. When you connect to the 72,203, the browser says, oh, you know what? That's not 6667. I'll let that through. And once it hits the TCP/IP stack, it says, whoa, buddy, I can't deal with values that big. I'm going to truncate that bit off and reduce you. So now you'll be port 6667. I hope that's cool. And it goes ahead and sends the connection. So your browser, which prevented the IRC connections before, just got owned because you just increased that number, which just gets truncated once it gets to the TCP/IP stack. I did not discover that. That actually goes out to the respectable security group, Goatsy Security. So thanks for them for finding that. So at this point, I've attacked Anna and I've attacked her router. I've connected to every single port and I found what services she's running. So what can I find out about her? What can I attack? What can I learn? As I'm attacking these ports, I find she's running Apache. So I connect to her Apache and she's keeping like a little blog or internal journal. So I read about it. It's about Twilight. I love Twilight. Awesome. I mean, she's a Team Jacob fan. I'm more of a Team Edward kind of guy. But here's the thing. I now know the information to woo her. So I'm ready for a meeting. I'm ready to go the next level. Now, before we get to that, how do we prevent NAT pinning? Well, I want to do a couple things. If you can, have a strict firewall. Don't allow outbound connections that you wouldn't normally allow. If you don't allow iris, if you don't have any teenagers in your house, block port 667. Client side, make sure you're running up-to-date browser as they continuously fix these things. And also continuously create bugs, so I don't know. That's your decision. Use NoScript if you're using Firefox. That now prevents NAT pinning. And run a local firewall if you can. Something like Little Snitch to basically say, oh, your Firefox or Chrome is trying to connect to this port that we don't normally connect to. Do you really want to allow that through? All right. So now that I'm ready to meet Anna, I'm going to send her a message. And as Robert, I'm going to say, hey, because she'll listen to Robert, her boyfriend. So I say, hey, I want you to meet this guy, Sammy. He's really great. And he'll actually come over tonight. Now the problem is I can't ask for her address, right? I can't just say, hey, what's your address? I'm Robert, I should know. So we're going to find out where she's located. So I give her another link to click because I'm Robert. So I say, hey, read his Twitter, go to this link. Now, she's going to click on that and I'm going to find out where she is. All right. So the moment you've all been waiting for. XXX. SS. All right. We're going to do geolocation via XXXSS. Well, what does that even mean? All right, I'll tell you. So, Anna will visit the malicious site. I have a lot of malicious sites. It's a bad thing, bad habit. So, once she visits the malicious site, XXX will scan her network and look for the type of router she's using. All right, well, why is that interesting? Hey, how does that even work? How can you determine the type of router just by someone visiting your website? Well, it's pretty easy, and there are a million ways to do it. This is one way. You can create an iframe to every possible router URL that you know of. So for example, Belkin runs on 192.168.2.1, and there's the setup.cgi, which you know is on Belkin's. So even if another router was using that IP address, they probably don't have that same URL of setup.cgi. So the iframe will say, all right, I'm going to hit this URL, and if it loads with an onload, we can then execute JavaScript. And that JavaScript says, oh, this was a Belkin, or this was a Linksys router. So now we know exactly what type of router she's using. All automated. Once we figure that out, we'll use XSS and we'll load remote malicious JavaScript from my server. Now that JavaScript will then execute on the router. It's her browser, but it pulls my JavaScript, puts it onto the page, executes it on the page. All right, so what's that do? Well, that JavaScript will then run Ajax, really cool technology, and Ajax will then do requests to the information page, basically the status information page of your router. So if you've ever been to that page where you can see the WAN address, the LAN address, MAC address, things like that, that's typically available even if you're not logged in. Now I could never connect to that directly because I'm an outsider. If I connect to her public IP address, I'll just get rejected on that port. So Anna's connecting to it because it's her browser executing my code that she executed when she downloaded it from going to this malicious site. Now, because this is XSS on the router, Ajax has the permission to do the request. All right, so what do we do? What are we doing here? We're just acquiring the MAC address of the router. All right, so why the MAC address? We basically take the MAC address and then we send it back to me. All right. Again, why MAC address? Well, obviously, if you ever want to know something, all you have to do is Bing it, right? So, load up your browser. I'll help you. Type www.bing.com, or maybe bing.sk here, right? And once the page loads, the search box comes up. So in that search box, you'll want to type in Google, and from there, you'll want to hit enter. Okay, wait a second. Why Google? Oh, yeah. It's because Google knows everything. Do you know what this is? This is the Street View car. There's only one. Drives around, takes pictures. It's really cool technology, right? It's driving around your city. It's taking pictures, through the windows, getting all this really cool information, and then they apply it online. So when you're on Google Maps, that you can see a street view. So why is that interesting? Well, one of the other things that they're doing while they're driving around is they're accessing GPS coordinates because obviously you need to know where to place that image and where you're located. So this is all fine, but recently Google has come under some scrutiny, right? Because they've been collecting, you may have heard that they're collecting some data from unencrypted wireless networks. Have you guys heard of this, some of you? So I think it was a big deal here, and what had happened was, I believe Google deleted this data from this unencrypted data in Europe. In America, obviously we freaked out, as America does, and they said, oh my God, you can't collect that data, it's illegal. Google said, we're so sorry, we're going to delete it. No, you can't delete that data, that's illegal. It's illegal to collect it, it's illegal to delete it. There's really, I don't even know what you're supposed to do. So the Americans, Google still has all the data in America, but they can't use it. I don't know, don't ask. So at this point, you're thinking, all right, well, okay, so you're using this unencrypted data for something? No. Because Anna doesn't use an unencrypted network. Like most of us, we probably have passwords on our network at home. We're probably using WPA or WPA2. And Google never collected any of that data, the encrypted data. So forget about the unencrypted data. Just forget about that for a moment. They're doing something else when they're driving around. When they're driving around and they're taking these pictures and they're getting these GPS coordinates, they're also looking at in the air, and they're sniffing Wi-Fi, and they're specifically looking for one thing, looking for packets, right? Beacons that say, hey, I'm a Linksys router, I'm right here. It doesn't matter whether it's encrypted or unencrypted, because you'll still see it, right? You still see, oh, there's a Linksys router here. And what do you see in the 802.11 packet? Well, you see the MAC address of the router. So what they're doing is they're driving around and they're collecting the GPS coordinate, but also the MAC address of the router there. And they correlate that together. So if they're on this street, they'll see the MAC address for the A4 router. And they say, oh, well, there's a router called A4 with this MAC address. It's approximately at this location. And you're thinking, okay, well, routers, distribute a long range. So, especially if you're using an Apple router. So, who cares? It's not that accurate. You can't, where would you even get that information? Okay. Well, what happens is there's one other piece of data they're collecting, the signal strength. So as the Google Street View car is driving down the street, they see, oh, I see a network called A4, and it has this MAC address. And the signal strength is about 10% right now. As it continues driving down the road, it says, oh wow, it's increasing. We must be getting closer. Now it's at 50%. Now it's at, say, 60%. And it starts to decline. It starts to decline at 60%. So they know, basically, let's say east to west, they know where that router is located. Obviously, it's not in the middle of the street, right? It could be north 3 blocks. You have no idea. But when the Google car gets to the end of the street, what does it do? It makes a left turn. And then you either see the A4 network again or you don't. The signal will either get stronger or weaker. And based off that, you can triangulate this data of where this router is. So it continues driving around and sees it again. And it collects the signal strength information. And it stores that in this big database. And it makes another turn and keeps doing this for every single router that it sees. It doesn't matter whether it's encrypted, it doesn't matter whether it's unencrypted. It has nothing to do with all the data they're collecting. Now, so how could I potentially access that? Well, HTML5 has this really cool feature called geolocation. So geolocation, what will happen is you go to a web page and it says, hey, do you want to share your location with this website? Your browser will actually say this if you're using Chrome or Firefox. Obviously, most people would just say, no, I'm not going to share my location with this place. But I was curious, so I clicked yes. So what happens? Well, my browser then does this post request. I sniffed. It's an HTTPS connection to Google. And it sends this JSON request with my router's MAC address. And what do I get back? Coordinates. So, now I'm thinking, all right, well, this is really cool. I mean, it's kind of scary, but really cool. Now, if I get Anna to execute this JavaScript or this HTML5, then I can acquire her address, right? But wait a second, Anna's never going to hit share location. She's smarter than that. Wait a second, I don't need her to click that. Because all share location is doing is saying, oh yeah, I'll send this MAC address in this JSON request. But if you recall, with XXXSS, I scanned her network, I found the exact type of router she's using, I then loaded the appropriate XSS for that router, loaded in my remote JavaScript, which then executed local AJAX onto the router, got the status page, looked in the status page, found the MAC address of the router, took that MAC address, sent it to me, now I have it, and I can produce this request on behalf of Anna and send it to Google. And what does this give me back? Jack Bauer level triangulation. Exactly where that router is located. To this point. So I tested this. I tested this on a lot of routers. I tested it in Europe as well. I wasn't sure, is this only in America? Does it work in Europe? It works very well in Europe as well. So how accurate is it? So I did driving directions. I said, all right, from these coordinates that I got to the actual address of the router. Driving directions, 30 feet. I looked over at the router. It was 30 feet away. It was so creepy. This is how accurate this signal strength information is helping produce, where that router is located. And it's this trivial to actually get this information. And even worse, we're thinking, well, do a lot of routers have XSS? Yes. Virtually every router with a web interface has XSS, except Apple, of course. They don't have web interfaces. There's actually a document just running around with XSS for virtually every home router out there. You can just go online and produce this attack for any type of router that you want. It's really easy. Belkin, Linksys, Verizon, whatever you want to do. So you're probably thinking now, oh man, I'm going home and I'm throwing out my router and getting a new one, right? I think the Street View card drove past me maybe a month ago and obviously not going to come back, or they'll come back in maybe a year or two. Or you know what, my router has the ability to spoof MAC address, so I'll go do that. That's smart. That's a really smart thing to do. Except it doesn't matter. So Google has this really cool new thing. It's called an Android phone. And it has these really cool technologies. One of them is called GPS, and one of them is called Wi-Fi. What do you think those Android phones are doing? When you go home with your Android phone tonight, with your brand new router that you bought because you freaked out about this when the car drove by, you go and you plug in your router and your Android phone says, oh, hey, look at that, a new router. I wonder what the GPS coordinates are right now. I wonder how strong it is as your phone is right next to your router as you're plugging it in. And that data gets sent up. Now you're thinking, okay, all right, Sammy, I'm smart. I'm going to get an Apple iPhone. Screw this Android thing. But it doesn't matter. Why? Because what about your neighbor? What about the person walking by? What about the car, driving down? If you have trains in Bratislava, trains will go by, and people's Android phones who aren't even connected to your network will detect this information. They'll detect the router, they'll detect the MAC address, they'll detect the signal strength, which helps the actual the triangulation to find exactly where you're located. And that will get sent up into this massive database, which you can query at any time with no problem. There's no limitation on it. I've tested a lot. So I wish I could have a slide here that says how do we stop this and how to prevent this, but I don't. So to conclude, I'm sorry to say it, but privacy is dead. Thanks, guys. Thanks a lot for having me. Any questions? Yeah.
What about the samy phones? Does they send some information too?
Not that I know of. I think Palm actually uses some Google software now, though, and supposedly that sends the information. Yeah.
Android thing, is it just your hypothesis or it's really going on? These new Android phones collecting data and sending this to
I have basically information from a Google person who essentially said that. With an Android phone, I'd love to take a look and pull open source and check out what it's doing. And people are even talking about iPhone potentially doing this as well. Because iPhone used to use Skyhook, and now they've migrated to Google because, well, Skyhook actually drives around looking for these, and Google's smarter. Just Google phone. Yeah, supposedly you can turn off, I think it's called location services, and prevent this. But that's just your phone, right? It's not the people around you. Right? The data is still there, and other people's phones are still collecting that information. Any other questions? Oh, no. Gentleman never tells. Yeah?
Well, the router has a different password.
A password for what?
For the admin, so you cannot log in and have a look at mail address.
Most routers will have that status page publicly available. And a lot of people also don't change their admin password because they think they'll set a WPA password and they'll say, all right, awesome, I'm protected. No one's going to be able to log into my admin account because, well, A, they either have to know my WPA password or they have to actually plug in physically to my router, in which case I'm already owned because they're in my house. But really your browser could actually log in for you with default credentials and then execute the same stuff as well. And from there you could do even worse attacks. You could, for example, change the DNS server and change the DNS server to your DNS server. So then every single client, whenever it does a DNS request, it goes to you and you can man in the middle every single website. Or basically anything, not even websites.
Is there any kind of kit or framework for this router thing?
I haven't released one. You could create one if you wanted.
Just download yours.
Yeah, that'd be a cool project. Also, if you have questions on ever cookies.
It's actually possible to perform AJAX to an address that is not the home address of that website that is already in the browser. I thought it was not possible to perform 10 AJAX to a different address.
That's right. You can't perform AJAX to another host. However, the XSS is on the router. So what's happening is the router is actually executing JavaScript to load this remote JavaScript file on the router page. So then the browser says, oh, well, this is all loaded from the router page. So yeah, I can continue to hit this IP address. So the XSS allows the AJAX to communicate locally on the router. In general, yeah, normally you would not be able to communicate that way. All right. Well, thanks, guys. If any other questions, let me know. And hopefully a couple of us will hang out tonight. Also, if anyone's interested, I can demonstrate what Americans think of Bratislava. I think there's an interesting video. Has anyone heard of the movie Eurotrip? That's essentially Americans' view of Bratislava, which I had to come and see it. Yeah. I'm sorry? What friend? Oh, my girlfriend. I don't have a girlfriend, obviously. Yeah.
Do you have some Twitter or Twitter?
Yeah, so my website, samy.pl, Twitter, Samy Kamkar, SAMYKMKR. It's my hacker alias, Samy. Because the .com was taken, and I used to do a lot of Perl, so I like .pl. All right.
The new Web 2.0 services like Govala and Foursquare, did you investigate those as well?
Those have been, there's some pretty cool attacks. I don't know if anyone's heard of the website Please Rob Me, where it basically it watches Foursquare and sees whenever someone leaves their house and says, oh, I just checked in, 100 miles away. You can now rob this person, is what the website says. It's pretty cool. All right. Have anything else?
Thank you.
All right, cool.